After 12 movies since 1980, Friday the 13th may be the most famous horror franchise of all time, even if it is more well known for its quantity over its quality, with Jason Voorhees easily being one of the most famous movie villains of all time. But how could the franchise have been different? How much would have been altered if Freddy vs Jason did end up releasing in 1988? And how cool would it have been if the films actually had some real recurring characters? Now, sadly, we'll never actually know this, but we can document what could have been. Throughout this video, I'll be looking into all the unmade Friday the 13th movies, from what was essentially a Halloween 2 ripoff, all the way to the horrific, confusing rights issue we're currently facing as fans. I will state though, I will not be including Sean Cunningham's idea of an anthology sequel, as it never even went into the concept phase, and I will now be including Freddy vs Jason stuff in this video, as otherwise it felt a bit too short in my opinion. But with all that out of the way, let's begin with the original version of Friday the 13th Part 3. Now, originally there was plans to have a running trend in the franchise of the final girl from the previous movie returning to die in the sequel. This was very quickly changed, however, when Amy Steele was cast as the role of Ginny in Part 2, and changed even further when Halloween 2 was released the same year as Friday the 13th Part 2. The film was meant to be set immediately after the prior film, with the new film basically being a carbon copy of Halloween 2, with some changes, such as Ginny being a lot more violent as a protagonist, and the setting being an asylum instead of a hospital. Now, sadly this never came to be, as the concept of Jason leaving Crystal Lake was a controversial decision even this early on in the franchise, with the plan fully cancelled after Amy Steele decided to not return for another film of the franchise. Instead, the script was completely rewritten from the ground up, and a new movie was essentially made with Part 3, which completely replaced Ginny with Chris instead, and Ginny essentially not even being mentioned in this movie compared to her massive role she was meant to have. Personally, I like Part 3, but this sounds awesome because we've never actually got Jason in an asylum, which is something we've now had essentially twice in the Halloween franchise, with both the hospital setting of Part 2 and the asylum setting at the start of Resurrection. And apparently even the new Halloween coming out this year is going to also be set in a hospital, so come on Friday the 13th, give us a proper thing and not just that 5-second intro at the start of Part 4. Now, despite the cancellation of the original version of Part 3, those plans of a hospital theme for a Friday movie were used once again, this time focusing on Chris Higgins from Part 3, with a plot even closer to Halloween 2, changing the setting from asylum back to a hospital, and having Chris be much calmer than Ginny was planned to be, a lot more similar to Laurie Strode, who has just suffered from some serious PTSD after seeing all her friends get murdered. However, this film was essentially cancelled for the exact same reason as the previous entry. Basically, the actress who played Chris didn't want to return, simple as that. She didn't want to even do a horror movie in the first place, which does suck, but at least this concept was finally referenced at the start of the final chapter, which is set in a hospital for about 10 minutes. Now, there was also another version of this film, a much more famous version, which followed the same basic story as the final film, but instead features Jason's brother as the killer, with Jason dying at the end of Part 3. This concept was cancelled due to Jason not definitively dying at the end of Part 3, but once again was used as a concept very briefly for a sequel to Jason Takes Manhattan. Friday movies, they really like to recycle ideas. Shortly after completing Part 5, Paramount had huge plans for the franchise, with Tommy Jarvis now being the killer of the series, and the final girl from Part 5, Pam, would have been the main protagonist for Part 6. Surviving Tommy's attack at the end of Part 5, and trying to save him from himself and Jason's spirit as he breaks down, believing Jason is completely controlling him and he has no say in the matter. The film never happened though, due to the massive backlash against the fifth film, due to the lack of Jason and basically lack of anything else. Instead, the studio scrapped the plans, which I think sounded pretty damn cool, instead creating Jason Lives by bringing the character back from the dead, very literally. Now, I have my issues with Part 5. If you've watched any of my old videos, you'll know I hate Part 5 with a passion, but I've always stated that it is a good idea. I like the fact that they tried to do something new, it's just the execution was bad. So the fact that this movie wasn't made kind of sucks, but at the same time, the franchise wouldn't be what it is today without it. Now, this one's a very strange one. Apparently Tom McLoughlin, who created Jason Lives, had a concept about a crossover film with Cheech and Chong. Yes, that Cheech and Chong. They were going to be very self-aware camp counsellors who would continue the self-aware humour style of Jason Lives, but very little else is known about the film, even if it was an actual full movie or just one of the gags in an actual concept. Either way, Paramount decided to not go through with it, leaving to McLaughlin's next idea, which we'll cover soon. This is the first of many cancelled Freddy vs Jason concepts, and the first one was 1987's Nightmare 13 Freddy Meets Jason, which would have been a much darker concept compared to the final version we got in 2003, and ties the two killers together extremely well. Essentially, Freddy would have been a camp counselor at Crystal Lake when Jason drowned, with one version of the idea even having Freddy himself be the one who finally drowns Jason, which makes Freddy realise he enjoys killing, and what makes Jason becomes a very vengeful spirit. Now, the concept also featured a Freddy Krueger cult, something which would become much more relevant in a later idea, but this is still pretty damn cool, even if it does have a few different versions. The second of which was an idea very similar, but featured Freddy molesting Jason as a child, something New Line and Paramount quickly cut and did not like, with some other parts of the film such as A Fight in Hell, which also featured Ted Bundy and Hitler, seeming a little bit too far for a fun slasher crossover. They decided to cancel this concept altogether, however both Paramount and New Line were still interested in the idea of Freddy fighting Jason. This led to Tom McLoughlin to return to the franchise to pitch his idea for Freddy vs Jason. The film would have been set in an asylum focused on two inmates who believe themselves to be Freddy and Jason, with the imagination causing the two characters to fight in a dreamscape styled thing. The film was quickly dropped due to the film essentially being a huge bait and switch, and McLoughlin never made another Friday the 13th movie, despite saving the franchise with his first attempt. Going away from Freddy vs Jason for a moment, this film would have been a direct sequel to Part 7 in New Blood. Once again focusing around Tina, there was quite a few concepts of this one, the first of which had Tina just being released from a mental asylum, recovering from the events she just saw, with Jason returning to try and kill her. Tina's actress even wrote her own version, focused on Tina, who was now a psychologist herself, and had to help a new survivor girl to survive Jason, with the third being written by Tina's love interest in the film, which would have been the concept of Part 7 being a dream sequence, with Nick actually becoming another copycat Jason who ends up murdering Tina. Now, Paramount rejected all these ideas as none of the films fit what Paramount exactly wanted, aka a much bigger Jason movie which would make more money, so they made Jason Takes Manhattan, a much bigger Jason movie which made no money. Going back to the absolute mindfuck of the Godzilla franchise, in 1989 there was two different concepts created for Friday the 13th which have no relation to each other at all. The first was a very different version of Friday the 13th Jason Takes Manhattan, which would have been very different compared to the final version, as it was actually set on Manhattan Island, compared to the ship. There were scenes of Jason on the Brooklyn Bridge which had to be completely scrapped, the boxing match with Julius would have happened in Madison Square Garden, and the scene in Times Square would have been much bigger, and even though it did happen in the final film, it was cut down quite a lot compared to how much they wanted to do there, including the entire slasher chase scene, and most importantly, Jason was going to dive off of the Statue of Liberty. What the fuck, this sounds amazing. Sadly though, this never happened due to Paramount's extremely strict budget, leading to the title of the film being quite misleading and controversial even to this day, even if I absolutely love this film. Now the other concept for that year, we're going back to Freddy vs Jason, as a concept bloody disgusting called the Cult of Freddy would have seen Freddy cultists known as Fredheads wearing Christmas jumpers and burning themselves in hopes of giving enough power to Freddy to bring him back after the death in the Dream Master. Jason would have appeared partway through the film after the Fredhead leader threw a dead girl's heart into Crystal Lake, causing Jason to rise and kill them all, leading to Freddy's own return. Now, not much else is known about this concept apart from how they would have both been brought back, not even the fight scenes themselves or who we'd be mostly focusing on as the human characters, but still, it sounds cool and it sounds a lot more logical than what we got in the final film, which is still a bit weird to this day. A later revised version of the concept removed most of the Cult of Freddy plot ideas, instead just focused on the two being alive again and fighting. Now, this concept was essentially a redo of the Cult of Freddy idea, which would have removed most of the Cult of Freddy stuff, instead just focusing on the two being alive again and fighting. This led to one of two different endings, one where Freddy lives, one where Jason lives. Similar to the King Kong vs Godzilla myth about their fight at the end, this one would have actually come true, and depending on which version of the film you watched, it would have either seen Freddy survive or Jason, which is a cool concept, and I'm surprised that movie crossover battles haven't done this properly, because it is a cool idea and I really enjoy that as a concept. And we have another Freddy vs Jason concept, but this one was made in 1995 and was really weird. Essentially, we got a role reversal of sorts, with this version of Freddy vs Jason showing Jason living in Elm Street and being one of the kids that Freddy attacked, instead of the idea of him being the camp counselor who killed Jason. Pamela would have also been one of the parents who killed Freddy before running away to Crystal Lake, where Freddy haunts Jason as a child until he dies in the lake. The devil resurrects them, because fuck it, and tells them whoever kills the most gets to stay on Earth forever. A later version of this idea turned into a weird time travel plot, which still had the same start of the film, but the two forces joined to kill Satan instead in the 17th century, which erased them both from existence because there's no evil anymore to control them or something, I don't know. There's also a weird version of this film with a detective removing them both from history by killing Freddy before his trial when he was alive. This concept was essentially inspired by the O.J. Simpson trials, another film concept which had Jason in court for all his murders after he was arrested. Now, Freddy would have then appeared, using Jason to get into the dreams of the jury members and come into the real world, leading to the two of them battle. It's so fucking dumb and very on the nose for the year that the concept came out, but I honestly love it. It's very cheesy, very meta, and with the O.J. Simpson trial itself being really relevant even now, this film could have ended up great and a good timepiece for the 90s. It's a shame it didn't happen, but at the same time, I'm so glad it didn't, because this is so stupid. Going away from Freddy vs Jason, but once again not for the last time, this concept was much more of a passion project than anything else, but it still sounds like a really good idea. The film was created by Robert Ziegler and David Boucher. The film would have followed many characters from previous films, such as Ginny, as well as Tommy Jarvis and his now wife, Megan, from Part 6. The film would have been set during a winter storm, with the film apparently having a very similar ending to how the 2009 reboot ended. The film was pitched to the franchise creator Sean Cunningham, who had to turn the film down due to the rights issues with so many different characters. This did, however, lead him to re-pursue another Friday the 13th movie, leading to some other concepts, such as Jason battling gangs in the hood, Jason being underwater throughout an entire movie, Jason killing people on a safari, and even a NASCAR Friday the 13th movie. But all these were cancelled, which eventually led to Jason X being set in space, but none of this would have happened if not for this original concept, and I do respect them over that. Now, despite not really being unmade, there was one huge difference between the endings of the Freddy vs Jason concept from Damien Shannon and Mark Swift compared to the finished film, and this was a massive lead up to a sequel featuring Pinhead from Hellraiser, which is awesome as hell because Hellraiser does not get the recognition it deserves. Similar to the final version, the film would have ended after Jason pulls Freddy's head out of the water, something which we saw in Freddy vs Jason, but instead it now adds an extra scene where Pinhead drags them down to hell. This part was completely cut because New Line didn't want to purchase the rights to Hellraiser from Dimension Films, or even rent them out due to a very high cost, apparently. Now this hurts to even think about, because as a British person, Hellraiser, even though it's been Americanized to fuck, it's our slasher franchise. It's our disturbing, over-the-top horror franchise as a Brit. And especially with the Doug Bradley era films so close to this, it would have most likely had him play Pinhead. And this really hurts. But at the same time, I'm also happy it didn't happen, because just seeing how much Dimension Films have fucked the franchise, I'm kind of worried as to how much control they would have had over a possible Freddy vs Jason versus Pinhead sequel, and how destroyed they would have made the other two franchises after destroying their own. The last Freddy vs Jason concept, I promise, and it is the most famous cancelled film featuring Jason, Freddy, and Ash from Ash vs Evil Dead, which would have been a direct sequel to both Freddy vs Jason and 1990's Army of Darkness, where Ash visits Crystal Lake with the Necronomicon, essentially accidentally resurrecting Freddy, who used the book to resurrect Jason's victims to kill him. This would have led to an uneasy alliance between both Jason and Ash fucking Williams, in order to stop Freddy from resurrecting his weird zombie-like army, eventually ending up with all three battling each other after some betrayal or some shit. It's never really explained. The film was not made though due to New Line Cinema only owning the rights to the first Evil Dead film, with the second being owned by the De Laurentiis Film Group and Army of Darkness being owned by Universal. Apparently though, all three companies were on board initially, until Universal wanted, and I'm not joking here, 50% of the box office due to them being the only major studio out of the three, since New Line were only partly owned by Warner Bros. At the time. You know, bringing one character to a movie, they wanted 50%, they didn't even have a touch up on the script or production. Fuck that, this led to a huge disagreement, and it didn't end up happening, which sucks. Although the concept did end up sort of being reused for the comic series with only a few differences, and a fan-made short film was also released in 2011, which also featured Leatherface, because fuck it. Now it sucks we didn't get this concept, but at least it was sort of reused for the Freddy vs Jason vs Ash comic series, and I always like it when unmade stuff does eventually get its time in the limelight, even if it's not as a feature-length film. We've now officially reached Friday the 13th fuckery, with the very famous cancelled sequel to the 2009 reboot, which had a horrific rocky time in development. Now, this was originally written by the duo behind Freddy vs Jason and the previous reboot, so the sequel is going to be very different. Apparently it was going to be set in a snowy environment, however, when Warner Bros. Gave all their rights to the franchise back to Paramount, the film was cancelled. Which leads on to the next part. With Paramount now re-owning the series after 20 years, they made their own ideas for a new film set in the 80s. This project was redone as a prequel to the original film, with the concept title of Friday the 13th Part 13. This concept also ended up being cancelled shortly after, which led to so many ideas. My god, they were thrown around so much. I'm like, it's just so stupid how many concepts were created just because they couldn't decide on one. After part 13 was shelved, there was a found footage film, almost like a home video styled stuff, which would have once again been a prequel, and there was a TV show concept, this time being a meta concept, in the same vein as stuff like Wes Craven's New Nightmare and even the Scream TV series, focused on how Jason being real as a reality show is made about him, which led to Jason murdering people who simply think it's someone wearing a Jason costume, but both concepts were quickly dropped because they were stupid, which led on to the next item on the list. The 2017 film, which was now officially titled Friday the 13th Origins, also just known as number 13. The film was a prequel/sequel to Paramount's original 8 films, following the murder of Jason's father, as well as Jason being brought up after dying in Part 8. The main difference for this film compared to others is that the script was completed. Locations had been found and had been booked, casting had been ongoing and nearly finished, and then the film was cancelled. After 8 years of trying to get a sequel to either the reboot, the original timeline, or just something brand new altogether, they had everything prepared and then cut it at the final moment. Now, apparently this was due to the movie Rings being a box office disaster. Rings, the third film in a Ring series, caused the Friday the 13th movie to be cancelled. Essentially, due to the film's disappointment, Paramount executives became obsessed that people weren't interested in horror reboots anymore and didn't want to risk 13 being a bomb. So instead of the release date, which the studio planned for Friday the 13th, they released Mother, which kinda bombed, grossing only $44 million on a $30 million budget. Now, if you're gonna tell me that a new Friday movie would make under $44 million, I'm sorry, you're wrong. You are just plain wrong because the franchise has been left on for so long. And the simple fact that Rings, which was a fucking third film in a franchise, which was never the biggest franchise to begin with apart from the Japanese series, is stupid to a 40-year-old franchise which has die-hard fans to this day. Not much else is sadly even known about this prequel, except that Pamela would have had a role in the film, with Jason's father Elias Voorhees finally getting a full on-screen appearance in a movie, alongside with Corey Feldman returning as Tommy Jarvis for the sequel scenes. Honestly, the cancellation of this film really does annoy me, and the fact that it all got cancelled as well due to rights issues is so damn stupid, because now essentially as fans we're stuck in a rut without any new movies. The last film was literally a decade and a bit ago, leaving the longest gap between any of the films ever. It sucks and it's stupid, and it's basically done because executives don't know what to do with franchises, and instead of handing them over to fans who have done amazing fan movies such as Never Hike Alone, they decide to spend about $40 million on a slasher movie when you need about 5 to 10. Simple as that. Wow, and I thought Godzilla had a lot of cancelled films. I mean, it does, and a lot more than these, but there's still quite a few here, which is a very low bar franchise, and I wouldn't have expected this many cancellations for what was essentially Paramount's quick cash grab to fund other project. As of this video, there are currently 3 different concepts in the works, one of which is a prequel by LeBron James that is titled Friday the 13th The Beginning, which is currently the most likely to get made depending on the rights issue. Second is by Tom McLaughlin as a direct sequel to Jason Lives, currently titled Jason Never Dies, with the final idea being from the original film's writer Victor Miller, who apparently has multiple ideas for Friday movies that he's written in the 40 years since his original film. Now, rights issues aside, I hope that all 3 of these get made somehow. I'd like to see some new ideas from the Friday franchise, just anything in general. Even if it's a shit LeBron James produced Friday the 13th prequel movie which makes absolutely no sense but has some fun kills, I'm good with that. Tom McLaughlin, he did an amazing job with Jason Lives, so Jason Never Dies sounds great too, if he's just going to continue that slapstick but gory concept he did in that film. And Victor Miller, make as many movies as you want, bro. I am 100% on Miller's side for this lawsuit. I've never liked Sean Cunningham. I think he's a money-obsessed, grubby bastard, if I'm being 100% honest. And it's obviously fucked over his best friend when making this movie, and then didn't care because he kept getting paid. But with all that out of the way, I'm going to say goodbye for now, and I will see you all next week with the video on the weird Friday the 13th TV show. But if you do enjoy this content and you are enjoying the Friday the 13th styled stuff, please do like and subscribe. And if you want more Friday content, I've got my top 10 list from last week, and I have a lot of very, very old cringy videos from I think 2017 to 2018, where I'm literally just sat on the floor in my old student accommodation and talking to a camera, well, a web camera, reviewing films which I had no idea how to review previously. So I will see you all next week and hope you have an amazing week. But until then, it's goodbye.